This story was sent to me by a follower named Katerina, and she's a licensed mortician from Louisiana. And according to her, what happened during her first year while working in a funeral home is the main reason she will never ever again be able to be alone with a body after midnight. So, Katerina told me that this happened back in 2018 when she was about 24 years old and she had been working at a small family owned funeral home for about a year. And she said she absolutely loved the job, right? The quietness of it, the dignity of helping others and their families, and that strange sense of peace that came with preparing someone for their final viewing in their final days. Now, by then, she had already embalmed dozens of people, elderly individuals, accident victims, hospice patients. Death itself did not scare her at all anymore. But one particular night changed all of that. Now, she had stayed late to finish preparing an elderly woman who had passed away peacefully in her sleep. And according to Katerina, the woman was in her late 80s, deeply religious, and her family had requested a private viewing that very next morning. And it was already close to 11:30 p.m. at this time, and everyone else that she had worked with had already gone home for the night. So it was just her, right? A radio playing softly in the prep room and the woman resting on the stainless steel table nearby. And Katerina remembers feeling a little uneasy that night. At first it was normal, but by now she was so used to it. But on this night, it was different, and she blamed it on being tired. And as she gathered her supplies and began cleaning up, she noticed something very odd. The radio that she had with her kept changing stations over and over, and at first she assumed it was maybe poor reception, so she'd adjust it. And a few minutes later, complete static, then another station again, and static yet again. And eventually she just shut it off entirely, and that's when she heard it. Someone was humming very, very softly. And she said she could tell that it was an older woman humming, and it sounded like a church hymn. And she immediately froze, and the sound seemed to be coming from the hallway that was just outside of the prep room. And she stepped into the hallway expecting maybe to see someone that she worked with or the funeral director, but there was nobody, absolutely nothing. The building was empty, and she checked the front doors, and they were locked. The offices were empty, the chapel was dark and empty, so she even looked outside, and there were not even any cars in the parking lot, so there was no movement. She laughed nervously to herself and told herself, maybe she was hearing things, or maybe it was, like the generator shutting down or starting. Oh, she was trying to rationalize it. Now, until she walked back into the prep room, and the radio was on again, and it was playing a very similar hymn that she'd heard just moments before by this mysterious voice that was humming it in the hallway, and she swears that she had unplugged it. Now, she remembers standing there staring at it, trying to convince herself that maybe she had simply forgotten, right? Then she noticed something that made her stomach drop even more. The elderly woman's hands that had been folded neatly on her abdomen before Katerina left the room, one was now resting at the elderly woman's side. And Katerina immediately started to rationalize it, right, to herself. Maybe, it was rigor relaxation. Maybe she accidentally bumped into the table. Maybe she remembered positioning them incorrectly before she walked out. So she repositioned them again, and she folded them again, and she took a deep breath, and she finished gathering her things, and she turned off all the lights. And as she reached the door, the radio came blaring back on again, and it went right into like a static mode. And through it, she heard a woman's voice very clearly and very softly say, "Child, don't leave me in the dark." And Katerina said every hair on her body stood up. She turned around instantly to look at the woman that that was lying peacefully on the table, and the room was completely silent, and she bolted out of there. She locked the prep room, and she sat in her car crying for almost 20 minutes before calling her supervisor. She was so overwhelmed with emotions and feelings. Now, that next morning, she reluctantly came back to work, and her supervisor listened to her story without laughing or judging her. And in fact, according to Katerina, he became unusually serious at that moment, and then he told her something that she'd never heard before. The elderly woman had spent nearly 40 years singing in her church choir, and she hated sleeping with the lights off, that very same woman that she was working on. And according to her daughter, whenever she was afraid as a child, she'd tell herself, Jesus won't leave me alone in the dark. And Katerina said that she still works as a mortician to this very day, but she says she has one rule that she never breaks, and no matter how busy she is, no matter who is on the table, if she has to leave a prep room after midnight, she always leaves one light on out of respect. And just in case someone is still afraid of the dark even after life. Let me know what you guys think in the comments.